So hi everybody for joining us. We just did a count and we are on number 7. We've done 6. This is number 7 that we've done every week. And we'll do one more next week, a Q&A with Jeff, which I will tell you more about at the end of today's webinar. So first of all, I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tanya McCausland. I'm the CEO of Diamond 6 Leadership and Strategy, and I'll be assisting in today's webinar. We're really excited to have Diamond 6 faculty member Joe Doty with us today. I'll tell you a little bit about him in just a moment. First, a few generalities that we like to go over at the beginning. We've had such amazing interest in these webinars every week, so we're really grateful for you for being here live, registering, and just generally being supportive of what we're trying to do to support you all the best way we can. We've also seen a lot of new names. I'm not going to say new faces, but new names on our list. So if you are new, I'm just going to take a minute to tell you a little bit about Diamond 6. Diamond 6 Leadership and Strategy is a leadership development company located in central Pennsylvania. It is our mission to develop confident and effective leaders who make an impact on their community and the world. We do this through custom leadership development workshops for organizations, school districts, associations, and companies across the country. Our faculty members, which Joe is one of them, are all distinguished, experienced, and deeply knowledgeable in various areas of individual and organizational leadership. If you're interested in learning more about us, you can go to our website at diamond6leadership.com. Good chance you've already been there through the registration process and whatnot. Some quick administrative notes to go over. So our schedule for today is will go as follows. I'm going to hand it over to Joe and Jeff. Jeff is going to participate a little bit in today's webinar as well. I'm going to hand it over to them in just a minute. And Joe will go through his presentation. At the end of his presentation, we will open things up for any questions, comments, thoughts that you have on today's topic of emotional intelligence. Please type any questions that you have, and you can do that at any time into the Q&A area of your Zoom screen. If you have any logistical questions or more administrative questions, please put those in the chat area, and my colleague Bree will assist you over there. And then we've also created a page on our site with all the recordings of our past 6 webinars. The recording for this webinar will be there as well. And you will get an email tomorrow with the recording for this webinar, which will be on that page, and you will see this recording as well as all past recordings. You don't have to do anything extra to receive that. You've registered, you're here, you will get that automatically tomorrow once we've loaded the recording onto that web page. So you'll get this recording and see all past recordings as well. So today we are here with faculty member Joe Doty, and he's going to be presenting on emotional intelligence and its critical importance for leaders, particularly in, I would say, uncertain times and circumstances, which we certainly are in right now. Joe is the Executive Director for the John Fegan Leadership Program and Associate Director of the Leadership Education and Development Curriculum at Duke University School of Medicine. I would assume also an interesting time there, so maybe you can share a little bit about that. He's a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy and served in various education and leadership positions during his 28 years in the Army. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Joe and Jeff. Joe, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and share your screen as well, or maybe you want to say a couple things and then have him share his screen.
Let me say something real quick. First of all, it is welcome everybody. It's great to be in touch with you all. Hope this finds you and all your family and teammates well, and continuing to work through the ongoing crisis we're all facing. It is really an honor and pleasure to have Joe join us today. I was thinking as Tanya was going through that I have had the great honor and pleasure of knowing Joe and his family for, I think, now over 30 years. Joe, I was thinking about that. I think we first hooked up at the George C. Marshall Center in Garmisch, Germany, in which we were both involved with working with leaders at the transition from the Cold War from all over Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union, as well as Central Asia. And then I worked with Joe somewhat while he was developing leaders as the head of the Simon Center, particularly focused on character and ethics at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and I was dean down here at the War College. And then, through a strange set of circumstances, I was able to visit with Joe and his lovely bride in Singapore when he was spending time in Singapore for a couple of years, working on leadership development for not only the Singapore's military, but also people in the Singapore's government. So Joe and I have interacted on leadership development. Joe, I just thought about this for not only 30 years, but on 3 different continents. So without further ado, I'll turn this over to Joe Doty.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Tanya. It's great to be here. This topic, emotional intelligence, is one of my favorites. It's also one of the most misunderstood topics. Emotional intelligence, for the most part, does not mean emotional intelligence. I've tried for years to try to think of a better word to describe what emotional intelligence is. I failed miserably because it's the foundation is the foundation is 4 basic skills, which we'll go into. It is a if I say it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. Emotional intelligence is a skill. It's a skill you can teach, learn, practice, and master. And when you learn the skills and practice the skills, it can help you both in your professional life and in your personal life. So, real quick, let me share my screen. Is it working, Jeff? We're good? Okay. There's a quick definition. This is my definition. Effectively, meaning positive outcomes, monitor self-awareness and act on one's thinking and emotions. The reason I brought up the point earlier about I have a problem with the word emotional intelligence is because there is a huge cognitive aspect of emotional intelligence. Being able to monitor and be aware of what your feelings are is a big part of emotional intelligence, but there's also a huge component which is cognitive. What am I thinking about? Why am I thinking about that? And then the 4 components: self-awareness, self-regulation or self-management, and then social awareness and relationship management. Or more simply, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral self-awareness and self-management. Actually, the more I think about it, instead of using the term emotional intelligence, I should just use this phrase. At its most fundamental level, that's what emotional intelligence is. Before I go any further, I want to show this book. This is one of the Bibles written by Bradbury and Grieve, and also Dan Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. Okay, more specifically, if you think of emotional intelligence in 4 quadrants, there's 2 skills that you can individually, that you can practice by yourself, which are self-awareness and self-management. So those are the me skills, and the we skills, where you're in the presence of other human beings, or the social awareness and relationship management. Okay, more specifically on self-awareness. The skill of being able to be aware of what you're thinking and feeling in the moment. So, for example, everyone that's listening to this conversation right now, it's very possible that one of you could be thinking about the fact that you miss the NBA, or you're thinking about what you're going to have for lunch. You could be thinking about anything. So that's the cognitive aspect, and then obviously the emotional aspect is how are you feeling? My legs hurt. I'm feeling anxiety. I had an argument with my girlfriend. My boss is mad at me. So again, this is a skill that you practice. I specifically mentioned daydreaming in there. I use daydreaming as an example. If you are daydreaming, by definition, you are not practicing self-awareness unless you are purposeful and intentional in, I am going to allow my mind to just go. And it's actually very healthy to do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you're just daydreaming, and you're not, by definition, aware that you're daydreaming, then you're lacking self-awareness. Last point on self-awareness is clearly it includes understanding who you are as a person, your strengths and your weaknesses. What are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you like? What do you don't like? I like sports. I don't like sports. I like cars. I don't like cars. Whatever it is your interest. So that's self-awareness. Self-management is, what do you do when you are aware? Self-management has to flow from self-awareness. So those of you that might have been thinking about your lunch or the fact that you meet the NBA, you're missing the NBA. Do you own those thoughts? Is that what you want to think about? Or would you rather think about, no, I'd rather pay attention to Joe Doty talking about emotional intelligence. Key point here is that it's purposeful and it's intentional. So you can own your thinking, and of course you own your behaviors. There's a term in the literature on emotional intelligence called monkey mind. And monkey mind means, and in the mindfulness literature, monkey mind means thoughts just pop into your mind. You could be laying in bed, you can be, it doesn't matter. When a thought out of nowhere just pops in your mind, it's a term called monkey mind. And the important thing in terms of emotional intelligence, specifically self-management, is, are you aware that thought just popped into your mind? There's another saying in this literature that's called thoughts think themselves. For example, right now, if Jeff yelled, if all of a sudden Jeff said, flying dragons. I'm giving that example because this has actually happened to me in a talk I was giving on this topic. Flying dragons. Guy in the back of the room yelled, flying dragons. And I said, thank you. I said, I know why you just said that. You said that because you wanted me and everybody in the room to start thinking about flying dragons, almost like an intentional monkey mind example. And my response was, I said, thank you for the example. I said for about 0.04 seconds, I thought about a flying dragon. And then I decided to own my own thinking and started thinking about whatever it is that we were talking about. As you can see on the slide, I talk about temper tantrums. Temper tantrums, road rage, those are examples of, I'm not going to say they're an example of a lack of self-awareness or self-management. I am not going to say that. Getting mad, having a temper tantrum, if that's what you choose to do, then that's a high level of self-management. So how you act when you're really, really mad, as long as you own it, that's a high level of self-management. I sent a text yesterday to a bunch of the people I coach, and the text said something like this. Question, are you aware, and this applies to this current pandemic where people are locked in their houses, are you aware of when you are getting mad? Can you feel it building? And again, that's a yes or no question, or maybe it's a sometimes. And then the follow-on question is, okay, if you can feel that anxiety or that stress or that madness building, what do you do with it? So self-awareness, being aware of what you're thinking and feeling in the moment. Self-management, what do you do with it? Awareness, awareness, awareness. Last point on self-awareness and self-management. It's a skill that you can practice all the time. All the time. Um, I've written about blind spots at the bottom of the slide. I'll come back to blind spots later. So anyway, self-awareness, self-management. Those are skills that you can practice. Okay.
Joe, before you go on, let me press you 1 second. Joe and I decided at the onset that we were going to have a little bit of a discussion as we went on as things popped in my head. And you've really emphasized the whole self-awareness thing a great deal. I'm with you on that. Back to your matrix, though, would it be fair to say that really the matrix, which depicts self-awareness, self-management, the me and the we, very well, at the same point, I would almost argue that it doesn't describe it as well, because in essence, I would almost seem to argue that self-awareness is fundamental to all that. You can't get to self-management if I'm not aware, and I probably can't get to social awareness, to relationship management if I'm not aware. So it's sort of, just by the virtue of the device, the paradigm for describing it, it shows that it's sort of all these things being equal, when in reality, they all seem to hinge over the one in the upper left-hand quadrant. And you're nodding your head vigorously, so I've got agreement. But here's my two questions.
Touchdown. Great point. Exactly right.
Doesn't that also then suggest the following, and that is, it's a total, complete argument against one of the common beliefs of that people are effective who multitask. And it seems to me this is totally counter to that, unless you say, I can multitask if I'm doing routine thing. I can look at some really routine, mindless email and play a TV program, play a baseball game in the background and kind of halfway listen to the ball game. If I'm doing something that's fairly routine or fairly something I don't need a great deal of awareness or concentration. But if I'm doing something that demands serious concentration, then I've really got to focus on that one thing. So it seems to me this argues against one of the things that people hold dear for some employees, which is multitasking. And number two, back to your self-management piece, and I like what you just said about anger management. Doesn't it also seem to suggest, particularly during a crisis, which we're going under now, a lot of the people who are listening to this probably have experienced some degree of pressure, some degree of stress, and just maybe to underscore a point I think you were suggesting pretty well, and that is, you're going to get angry. If you get angry and you feel it coming on, go in your office, close the door, kick the trash can if you need to, cuss 14 times, or go out for a workout, which is my personal thing I like to do, just to work it out. So it's, in other words, it's okay to be angry. It's just not okay if you mismanage your anger. I guess that maybe I'm jumping ahead to your social awareness piece. So I'm sorry, I was too much more there than I wanted, but I guess to kind of summarize, seems to be an argument against multitasking, and B, seems to validate getting mad's okay or human, it's just how you manage it.
I couldn't have said it better. The self-awareness is foundational to the other four skills. If you're not self-aware, arguably it's impossible to self-manage holistically. And if you're not self-aware, you won't be socially aware. And if you're not self-aware, you won't do your relationship management well. Multitasking, great point. There's a fair amount of research that actually multitasking is literally impossible. You might be doing something for 0.01 second followed by something else for 0.01 second, but you're not doing two things at the same time. And you're not, at least you're not doing them as well as they can be done. And then again, great point on, again, I did not, I hope I didn't say, if I did, I was wrong. I stand corrected. I have nothing against people getting mad. Actually, getting mad is sometimes the appropriate behavior. Sometimes yelling is the appropriate behavior. Sometimes screaming is the appropriate behavior. The whole question is, A, is that what you're choosing to do? And B, while you're doing it, are you cognizant and self-aware of the words that are the words that you're yelling? Are those the exact words you want to yell? Or the thing that you're throwing or kicking, is that what you want to do? So great points. Thank you for reinforcing them. The other thing that's so fascinating about this, again, you can't learn emotional intelligence in an hour. You can't, these skills are lifelong skills. This is stuff that you would have to practice. There's actually schools now, and maybe some of our participants are involved in them. There actually are schools, elementary schools, that are practicing these skills early, especially with kids they're having problems with. I think the earlier you can teach people, especially the skills of self-awareness and self-management, the better. But you're never too old, learn them if you haven't learned them yet, start when you're 40, 50, 60. So we've talked about these two. All right, social awareness is relationship management. As I like to put it, if you are in the presence of another human being, so that means you're not in the middle of the forest and there's no one around. So if you're at a Starbucks, or you're at Wendy's, or you're at Harris Teeter, or wherever it is you're at, if you're in the presence of another human being, you can practice these two skills. Social awareness is, of course, trying to be aware of what the other person that you're in the presence of is thinking and feeling in the moment, and being intentional and purposeful about it. And then relationship management is, again, you can see how this flows from self-awareness to self-management. Now I'm in the presence of another human being. I'm working on being aware of what they're thinking and feeling in the moment. And then, of course, what do I do with it once I'm aware of it? And I specifically use the example of Starbucks or Wendy's, or you're checking out at a store. If, again, this is a skill, for the 19 seconds where you're in front of another human being, maybe you're ordering your cup of coffee, you can choose to be cognitively and emotionally present with that human being or not. Again, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer. I'm just saying the skill is available to you to practice in the moment. A way to practice it that I use is if the cashier or somebody actually has a name tag, I will often say, "Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Bobby." Or, "How are you, Sally? How are you, Bobby?" It's really interesting. A lot of times the reaction is, "Whoa, how did you know my name?" "I know your name because I saw your name tag." I like to say in the practice of leader development, I say this 1,000 times a day in my relationship management is the most important skill. Now, when I say that, I'm assuming, purposely, there's that word, I'm assuming that the human being I'm talking to already knows that you've got to be self-aware and able to self-manage so you can maximize your ability to do relationship management. So again, in terms of whether you're at home with your wife, your kids, your dog, I guess maybe not your dog, but no matter where you are you have the ability to manage the relationship, and I'm using that term very benignly, depending on who it is that's in front of you. Obviously, if it's a subordinate or someone you work with, or it's your boss, intentionally being cognizant of what you're saying and doing in the presence of that person. It's a presence skill. It's a skill of being present. And so what are you doing while you're being present with that other human being or human beings? What are you doing? So social awareness, being aware, trying to be aware of what others are thinking and feeling. And then once you know that, or trying to practice that skill, what do you do with it? And you can see at the bottom there, the key skills there are listening, presence, and mindfulness. I purposely I interchange the words mindfulness and self-awareness. I will leave it at that. We can talk about that more. I'm not really into semantics a lot of times. As long as people are practicing a skill, I like to tell people you can call it crayons. As long as you understand what the skill is and you're practicing it, I'm happy. Again, paying attention in the moment. Awareness, awareness, awareness. I'll just let you ponder these for just 1 second. They're kind of a rehash. It's interesting, number 2 there. So let's say you're practicing self-awareness and you're talking to someone and they say something, let's just say you don't like or you disagree with. And so you start thinking, wow, I don't like this person, or I think this person's stupid, or what a stupid idea. Is that what you should be thinking at that moment? Again, no judgment here. I'm asking you to practice the skill. Is that what you should be thinking? Or should you be thinking, wow, that's an interesting idea. I've never thought of that. Wow, that's strange, but tell me more. Explain to me what you mean. So again, that's just an example of how you can actually practice these skills. And the skill I just demonstrated, A, was self-awareness. Did I know what I was thinking? B, self-management. Is that what I should have been thinking? Social awareness. I was aware of what the other person was saying and trying to understand it. And then relationship management. I was, my response was going to be what I wanted it to be. I love this question. Tanya, can we get people to answer this question on?
Let me try to.
They can real quick, they can type in if they'd like to try and
Yeah,
answer.
let me throw one at you, Joe, on this question, maybe, and we're seeing if somebody else wants to join you.
So if people want to answer Joe's question, if you go ahead and type in the Q&A or the chat box, we'll collect them and I can read them to you. Yeah.
Well, we're waiting for that, Joe. Let me ask you to step back maybe 1 second and talk a little bit about, maybe it's tied to your question. So leave that question to ponder up there. Leave that up there. Can you elaborate for a second longer on what emotional intelligence is not? In other words, what are some of the myths? You've already kind of expunged a couple. One, I think, is that emotional intelligence is emotional, and you're saying, no, it's much more cognitive than that. And second of all, even things like getting angry, if you manage it in terms of your social awareness and whatever, is still appropriate. It's just, you just got to be aware of what you're doing and how you're managing that. So I wanted to on that, if there were any other myths about emotional intelligence that need to be destroyed here, number one. And then back to this question here, one of them immediately comes to mind for me, and it's because of the last, and your experience as well, I think probably, when we were at the Marshall Center, you were in Singapore, a lot of the work I've done over the last 5-10 years on track 2 negotiations overseas with large groups of people from other regions, other countries. It seems to me one place you have to be really careful is what I guess I would call it cultural social awareness. In other words, what we understand to be socially correct on how you conduct yourself in American society is not necessarily the same in India or Pakistan, where I spent a lot of time, or in Iraq or Afghanistan, or in your experience in Singapore. So question, any myths that you want to dispel, number one, and is it true that you wouldn't necessarily practice this perhaps in a cross-cultural environment, or you'd perhaps do it very carefully?
Again, I think one of the primary myths is that people don't understand that it's a skill. They think it's something like philosophical or
EQ.
Right. It's not. It's not philosophical. And and I work primarily right now with doctors and medical school students, and it's a very difficult context to work for this topic. But one of the things that's helped me is that they love the word skill. It's a skill. It's something you do. So one of the big myths is that you either have it or you don't. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people that are born with the skill. Good. There are people that are not born with this skill. So that's one of the biggest myths. And of course, you highlighted it. There's a ginormous, that is a word, ginormous, cognitive aspect to emotional intelligence. Because a lot of times you're like, okay, what does it mean to be emotionally intelligent? And then 9 times out of 10, it means you're very aware of your emotions. That's an important part of it, but it's not it. The cultural aspect is huge. And again, that's being socially aware in relationship management. It also gets into understanding. Well, that's social awareness. Understanding your audience. Quite frankly, I'll total transparency. The first class I taught when I was in Singapore, I failed miserably, and I had been there about a month, and I did very, very, very poorly. And the reason I did very, very poorly is that I did not know my audience. I did not know them well enough, and I did not know the nuances of the audience that was in front of me. And I got some really good feedback on that, and I improved vastly. So that's just being socially aware. In terms of the skill, I would argue, and I'll argue with anybody about this, the most important skill here to practice and master in terms of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, and relationship management is listening. I also say I think listening is the most neglected leader skill on the planet Earth. I have no data. We could talk about that if you want to. Being able to.
I'm sorry, I do have one person. Let me just sneak in. I do have one person who also provided a possible answer to your question, if you would like to.
Yeah, there is an answer to this question.
I know you have an answer, but here's one. Here's somebody did type in. Bruce said, because this might be a little bit about social awareness actually, having and demonstrating a feeling without any filter or intentions beyond self-expression. Is that possibly not practicing presence, emotional intelligence?
Read that again.
Having and demonstrating a feeling, so maybe, I guess I would say maybe anger or frustration or, without any filter or intentions beyond self-expression.
Yeah.
But that might be more so maybe on your social awareness.
Self-management.
Self-awareness, yeah, social awareness, self-management kind of things.
Yeah. If I understood the comment or the question correctly, again, if your behavior, again, if what you are doing is 100% your choice, how you see me acting right now is 100% my choice, then you are at the peak of self-awareness and self-management. Period. Period. So when can you not practice being present and mindful and practice emotional intelligence? The answer is when you're asleep or you're unconscious. If you are awake, the time you wake up in the morning till the time you go to bed, you can practice the skill. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. If you're up 18 hours or you have 72 hours, I'm not saying it's easy. All I'm saying is if you're conscious, you can practice the skill. And the challenge is, this gets into the challenge. If you want to be able to do it, while you're awake, how do you practice it? And we can go into ways to practice this. Again, the class here is too short to go into a lot of this, but there's absolutely lots of ways you can practice this skill from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. It's one of my favorite quotes. I actually heard it last week from a guy I work with. Um, being emotionally intelligent really is about, in terms of leadership, is about connecting to other people. Listen to the words I just said. Connecting to other people sounds a little bit like relationship management. Connecting to other people. In terms of practicing the skill, I like to teach that there, in my mind, there are 4 quadrants. I don't have a slide on this. So just picture, there's 4 what I call practice fields for this skill. And the 4 are a professional setting. I think that speaks for itself. The other one I call close family. So wife, kids, perhaps aunts, uncles, close family. The next quadrant is acquaintances, friends. Not, obviously not siblings, maybe not even really your best friends, but just, maybe you're going to a ball game with friends or something. So that's a time you can practice it. And then the 4th quadrant, I don't really have a name for it, so I call it Starbucks or TGI Fridays or Wendy's or whatever you want to call it. And and as we've already discussed, it's again, it's a time, I would argue, you can safely practice the skill. So if, let's say you're at Starbucks and the person in front of you steps away, you step up to the barista. Do you have your phone in your hand? Are you looking at your phone or are you looking at the barista? When you order, do you look her in the eyes or look him in the eyes? Again, notice how I'm not saying what the right answer is. You can do, this is what's so important about this skill. You can do whatever it is you want to do. The important point is, like, if your choice is, I'm going to be staring at my phone while I'm ordering my latte, then that's okay, as long as that's what you want to do. Now, of course, think about that in terms of leadership. If you're talking to, I've actually had counseling sessions. I actually had a counseling session 4 years ago where for 45 minutes, the person who was rating me, and I'm not making this up, was on his phone for the entire time. He never looked at me. Never. Now, was that intentional or not? Was he aware of it? I don't know. To be frank, I don't care. But anyway, so it's just an example. Anyways, here's some resources. 2 of those books we talked about.
Joe, let me jump in with a question for you then. Can you talked a good bit about development. Question I have, I've seen some illustrations now, particularly in business schools. I want to say Notre Dame, Northwestern, I think UVA, I could be mistaken about that. In some of their graduate business schools, they have started administering diagnostics for EQ along with GRE scores and the like, because they found that, particularly in business schools where there's a lot of teamwork on case studies and whatever, they find that students tend to perform better who have a higher EQ level than even perhaps if they have a real high IQ but a low EQ, they just don't work well in that environment. So they're almost rating the EQ level equal to or ahead of the GRE scores or IQs. I was wondering if you'd seen any other examples of that in academia. And then second of all, you've talked about developing the skill. I have seen and played around with some of the diagnostics that are on the internet. I've used them in class for some of the courses I've taught on sort of giving you an EQ score. But I've often thought that those diagnostics were, and this now I'm getting into more of the testing diagnostic field, the diagnostics were fairly incomplete or weak, or that we don't have as much confidence in the diagnostics that have been developed for EQ as we have for diagnostics on other characteristics of people, whether that's IQ or something else. So I'll question if you have any thoughts on the validity or lack thereof of some of the diagnostics that are out there for EQ.
Yeah. back to go to your first point first on EQ versus IQ. I mean, it's one of the first things that this guy talks about in his book is that, and he says tons of data, that EQ is actually more important than IQ. And there's actually, he shows data where people who have a higher EQ actually earn more money than people who have lower EQ. My take on that is IQ is important, EQ is important, and work. Some people say IQ is stagnant or can't be. IQ is stagnant. I don't know the answer to that. But obviously I do know the more you read, the more you learn, the smarter you get. So you can certainly improve what's in your brain, the amount of knowledge in your brain. And then, as we've already talked about, of course, you can improve your EQ from diagnostics. I will never say psychometric tests are bad. Data is data. Whether it's Myers-Briggs, the DISC, Hogan's, whatever they are. One of the challenges with them is that they are often self-report. Self-report gets into social desirability, and people may be trying to game the
test.
The test. I still think I think any data is better than no data. One of the most important things in terms of assessing someone's EQ is doing a 360 though, getting other people to. That's why the Hogan's thing. Which kind of gets into. This is a good point for me to bring up on this slide. At the bottom, I talked about blind spots. Blind spots is a very important emotional and cognitive construct to understand. All humans have blind spots. A blind spot is something about you that you don't know. And you can't know unless, by definition, it's a blind spot. If you know it, then it's not a blind spot. And we all have them, and the only way you can discover them is for someone else to tell you. Again, I give mundane examples all the time. I mean, perhaps I have when I get nervous, maybe when I'm nervous, I start flicking my ear when I'm in meetings, and I don't know it. That would be a blind spot. I have a blind spot that got me into some trouble years ago during my Army days. I have a habit when I'm agreeing with something, my head goes this way. Like I might say, Jeff, that's one of the best things I've ever heard you say. I love that. But my head's going like, no. Well, I had a boss that went crazy when I did that. At the time, I didn't know I was doing it. It was a blind spot. So again, mundane examples. We have emotional blind spots. Emotional blind spots can get you into a lot of trouble. That's kind of a long answer, Jeff, but it gets back to the psychometrics. You've got to be able to, a 360, people will tell stuff about you don't know.
Yeah, but back to that, one last question on that, Joe, in your comment. Any particular EQ diagnostics that you've seen that are readily available that you think are better than others? And then as you're pondering that for a second, back to blind spots and diagnostics for a second longer. I once we've all taken a ton of diagnostics. I took a diagnostic one time on listening, and not surprisingly, and you mentioned listening as an important leadership skill overall and fundamentals, I think, to self-awareness. Found that my skill level was at least lower than I wanted it to be. I'll put it that way. One thing that I learned for me, which works for me, is if I'm talking with someone, if I look them dead in the eye, if I really consciously look them in the eye, I tend to listen better. I don't know if that's unique to me or if that's general for human beings as a whole, but I will tell you that is a technique that I have adopted when I really want to make sure I'm really intently listening to somebody. which was a derivative of that diagnostic. And then the final point, and then I'll turn it back to you, Joe. I can't, if you go to your resource page for a second, on the end there. Yeah, I'd call attention to people, and hopefully I'll have Bree, who's listening, put this on the resource page we send out and this over. There's also an excellent TED Talk by Goldman on emotional intelligence. You know, I recommend the book, which is a pretty good read, but it's a bit longer. But if you just got time for a 10 or 15 minute TED Talk on EQ, that's something worth listening to. So, Joe, I'll toss it back over to you.
I loved your listening example, Jeff. Looking people in the eye. One of the biggest challenges I have in teaching this skill is, well, Joe, how do I learn to do this? How do I practice it? And the problem with that question is, I call it the 7.5 billion people on the earth problem. Everybody's different. Everybody learns differently. And so, I mean, I have some techniques that I offer up to people. Again, you just gave an example. It can be sticky notes. It can be notes in your car. It can be notes in your refrigerator. It can be a tattoo. It can be something on your refrigerator. I mean, it's endless. Apps. There's zillions of apps. I actually text people all the time with a question like, "What are you thinking about right now?" I don't really care what they're thinking about right now. I'm asking them if they are aware of what they're thinking about right now. I'm going to tout the fourth book here, Attending Medicine, Mindfulness, and Humanity. It's not a book about being a doctor. It is not a book about medicine. You're thinking, well, it says medicine. It's actually, I think, one of the best leadership books I've ever read. And the bottom line is, because leadership occurs in context. Well, this book, the context happens to be medicine. But the way that Ron Epstein writes about attending meaning presence, he does a great job of articulating and describing how to practice emotional intelligence. In this case, it just happens to be medicine. It could be auto mechanics, it could be sports, it could be whatever.
So I have one more question. I'm going to hand over to Tanya because I can see there's some questions popping up on the board here. And that is, kind of bring us back for my final question on, since we're talking in particular about leading during a crisis, could you take a couple minutes longer and just underscore from your perspective the intrinsic value, particularly of emotional intelligence, how leaders might think about using that or developing that, particularly during a crisis like they're confronted with right now?
Yeah, great question. I can't think of a better time to be self-aware and self-management and self-managed than in a crisis. And if the leader is going crazy, or if the leader is the leader's being watched, and one of the most important things that the leader needs to do in a crisis is to show presence and show confidence, and to take charge, and to project whatever image they want to project. Taking charge, showing presence, being confident requires self-awareness and self-management. Everything requires those skills. So the question for the leader in a crisis is, what is it that I want to do? What is it I want to be? What is it I want to project? Humility, decisiveness, transparency, good communication skills, thoughtfulness, teamwork. Again, all those words I just described, in order to do them, you have to think about, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show transparency. Okay, to do that, you have to be self-aware and self-managed. So there's not a more important time to demonstrate these skills than in a crisis, because you want to own your behaviors in a crisis.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tanya, who's going to orchestrate some questions coming in from the broader audience.
Hi. Yeah, we have a handful of questions and one comment. So I'll start with the comment. Fred just commented that Harvard Business Review says that EQ is twice as important as IQ plus having technical skills. So just to kind of reiterate what you were saying earlier. Gary has a question about what you were talking about at the beginning, real quick, is what is the name of the video? I kind of know, but you need to specify. The movie regarding the mutineers you were chatting about.
Oh.
It was Gettysburg, the movie, but you need to explain what scene you were talking about, because I can't do that.
Yeah. Real quickly, I'm sorry to take Joe's time up, but a number of you out there have been with us on our leadership workshops and gone to Gettysburg with us. And as a consequence, we have suggested to you prior to that, or many of you afterwards, watch the film Gettysburg, okay? And when we go to a little round top, we talk about the 20th Maine and the commander of the 20th Maine, the guy by the name of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who was an educator, by the way, professor of rhetoric from Bowdoin College in Maine. In any event, quickly, the 20th Maine distinguishes itself in fighting off and doing a bayonet charge down the hill to fight off the advancing Confederates on Little Round Top. Militarily, most people would argue if they had been unsuccessful, the Battle of Gettysburg would have been a two-day battle and a Confederate victory. So it's a real decisive point in the particular battle. I always argue that Chamberlain set himself up for success by what happened several days prior to that, which is in the film, and that is when he is presented with 40 mutineers from another Maine regiment, the 2nd Maine Regiment, who had mutinied, and he has presented them by a provost, a military cop, and told, these guys are now in your unit, you can shoot them all if you want to, that's fine, but nobody really cares one way or the other. As you'll see in the film, a dramatization, but based in historical fact to a degree. He is able to convince them by showing, I think, empathy, by listening to them, and by controlling his emotions at a particular difficult time, because as you'll see in the film, there's a lot going on at that particular moment while he's dealing with these mutineers. He convinces all but 2 of these guys to actually fight with the 20th Maine. Well, then it becomes a math problem. His regiment, which is assigned to have 1,000 people, by the time they get to Gettysburg, they have around 300. They have lost that many people through disease, injury, killed in action, and probably desertions. So the fact that he's able to gain 40 people who are willing to fight and not spend part of his small force to guard them during this decisive action probably was, I would argue critical or essential to him being able to be successful at that decisive moment. So, long-winded way about saying, if you gave him one of those emotional intelligence diagnostics, and by the way, Joe, I'll use that to introduce a question. I think somebody did ask if we could specifically recommend a diagnostic.
I'm getting to it. I have a couple other questions.
I think if we administered one of those diagnostics to good old Joshua Chamberlain, we would find, even though he never heard of Daniel Goleman or read his book for sure back in 1863, that he would have probably a fairly high EQ.
Right. So now that everyone has a lot of time quarantining, they can watch the movie.
That's right. It's a bucket of popcorn movie. That long.
I want to move on because we have a handful of other questions I want to make sure that we get to. Tricia would like to know, how do you know how accurate your self-awareness is? I have run into so many folks who just have no idea how they come across to others. It is truly a struggle for them, but it might also be a struggle for us and we don't know it. So who knows? Do you have a brilliant sentence on that?
Wow.
Well, actually, here, can I give you another question? I think the 2 kind of tied together, and this one's a little more specific. So I think that we can address 2 in 1. Because Cindy would like to know, any thoughts on how to lead up regarding emotional intelligence? Some executive upper level leaders don't have EI or don't have EQ or EI, and it can be a challenge in an organization. So I think those 2 questions really address kind of other people's awareness, maybe, or how they're coming across, right?
Yeah. To the first one, it's a great question. I mean, if someone lacks, the bottom line is if someone thinks they have self-awareness, is high in self-awareness, and they're not, they have a huge blind spot, and they may not know it. And so it's the only way to expose someone to their blind spot is to talk to them about it. And again, if someone's not open-minded to learning or changing, then you're going to run into a brick wall. Again, I would argue people who are clearly poor listeners lack self-awareness. Now the counter argument is I'm not listening to you because I don't want to be, and I'm still practicing self-awareness and self-management. That's just, we're getting into leading up. Two things about leading up. One, if you're not competent as a subordinate, or you don't have trust of your boss, you're going to have problems leading up. So that's the self aspect of that. But if you do have the confidence and trust of your boss, then the self-awareness and self-management skills are thinking of ways that you can properly influence their thinking. The word I specifically used was influence. It's a social awareness thing. You've got to know your bosses, know them very well. And so in order to lead them, you've got to think of ways to influence their thinking and influence their behaviors. You've heard the old saying, try to come up with an idea. It's your idea, but make it think it's their idea. So those are just some of the skills. The big thing is to know them and know how you can influence them.
I wonder if it's just also a practice in our own self-awareness then too. Is it us, it's forcing us to practice our own emotional intelligence when someone else is not? Possibly. My own question, I guess.
Yeah, one of my favorite things I like to say to audiences if I know that Tanya knows this skill, if I know that Tanya knows this skill, and now I'm having a conversation with Tanya, and it's very obvious she's not listening to me, my assumption is it's intentional and it's purposeful. That seemed harsh, but that's kind of the reality of, once you have mastered this skill, if Joe's not listening to you, if we're at a pub or we're at a concert or we're somewhere, we're at a game, we're at a meeting and you're talking and I'm like, or I'm like this, I'm twiddling my thumbs, you can assume that I'm purposely being disrespectful to you because I like to consider myself, I have a high level of self-awareness, self-management. Anyways,
I was listening to you. I'm literally writing in an question.
I was using it only as an example.
Cool. So we have Andy has a comment and then a question. And this goes into some of the assessments you were talking about. So first the comment, also leading in a crisis, especially when your team is dispersed, which most of us are experiencing right now, the leader should also anticipate what emotions, feelings their teammates are dealing with in isolation and over-communicate notions of trust and caring. This is something we talked about, I think it was last week when we talked about communication in this type of environment and the importance of assessing people's sort of mental and emotional state with what we're going through right now, and to communicate very frequently. I've seen senior leaders struggle with communicating because they are failing to empathize with their team's pain points, and it's just hard to maybe understand what they are under the circumstances.
Again, I think it's a no-brainer, but I'm going to say it. Asking someone, how are you doing?
Right.
It is powerful. And now the follow-on to that is when they say fine or okay, you don't accept that.
Right.
That's not a good answer to my question. I'm genuinely interested in how are you doing? Tell me more.
Right. That's a really good point.
On that score, if I could jump in, Joe, one thing that I do a lot now when I talk to people is who I know is they'll say fine, and then I'll press them with the second part, which is tell me about your family. Tell me about your dog, your work, your to expand that to the how you are doing is a plural and not a singular question.
Yeah. Back to the best tools. I'm going to give you the cop-out answer. There's not a best one. Because there's zillions of them. I mean, there's even in these books, there are assessments that you can use. This book actually has some of the best. I tell people if you want to read the book, you really only have to read the first 53 pages. The rest of the book is all about how to practice and assess the skills. The same way in Goldman's book, he's got assessment in it. There are a million assessments out there. Obviously, the DISC. I already mentioned the DISC. I already mentioned Hogan's, and of course Myers-Briggs. There, I think the smartest thing to do within any organization is to make up your own assessment for these skills. Why do I say that? That way you can contextualize them best. So for example, what we have done here at the Duke Med School, we've come up with our own emotional intelligence. We call it the HEAL, Health Evaluation of Leadership. But it's all asking questions. It's both a self-assessment and and I'll send it to anybody if they want to see it.
Yeah.
It can be used both as a self-assessment and a 360, just depending on the wording.
Okay. So that answers Bruce's question. He wanted to know if either one of you have any diagnostic recommendations. And Andy did as well. He specifically wanted to ask, because you may know a little bit about this, do you know if at all, if the Army is measuring emotional intelligence and if you think it's being assessed correctly?
Well, Joe, I'll throw my little bit out. I'm a little bit away from this because I've been out now for about 18 years. We did a lot of work with diagnostics. We did a lot of work with Myers-Briggs, of course, which most people has mixed reviews on. You can say it gets into emotional intelligence to a degree if you believe there's an association between introspection and extroversion based on that, for example, and some of the other aspects of Myers-Briggs. We did a lot of work on 360 at the War College, began using that a great deal. Interesting, 2 comments about 360s is, I will tell you, for any organization, they are time and resource driven. To do it correctly, it's fairly expensive, not only in terms of financial cost, but also I think the time it takes to fully go through it and have the individual evaluated in a one-on-one coaching environment. It takes an awful lot of time. So great tool, but it takes an awful lot of time. One of the things we found when people got blind spots was oftentimes with War College students, who are a little bit older, obviously, that their spouses often could tell their blind spots in a New York second. And then even though the individual would oftentimes say, no, that's not me, when it came out in the 360, their spouse would go, oh yeah, that's him, totally. Yeah, so it's interesting. I want to say, why don't you people talk about to each other? I don't think the military does as good, frankly, and I'll be candid about this, and I can say this now since I'm retired, about using diagnostics and things like this as they should. There's too much literature and example out there. A good friend of both Joe and I, a guy named George Reed, who's the dean of the School of Public Policy at the University of Colorado, wrote a book on so-called toxic leadership, which is really a systemic as opposed to an individual study in some ways, because it's not only about how individuals demonstrate toxic leadership, but frankly how organizations systemically promote people who have been demonstrated at all levels to be fairly toxic. And unfortunately, I've seen far too many examples of that in the military, which may be a matter of military culture. And I'm going to ask Joe to comment about this. May be a matter that leadership roles change every couple of years, so you can sustain yourself as a toxic guy for a short period of time and get the most out of the organization and then move on. I don't know. But so short answer, summarize real quickly, yes, doing some work with diagnostics. Is the military doing as much as they can with diagnostics, particularly emotional intelligence? I would probably say no. Joe, over to you.
Really not that much to add. The Army is doing a lot of, the past 10 years is doing a lot of online assessing of leaders at the 360 level, including a self-assessment. And and I've seen the surveys, and they do get into emotional intelligence. So I'll just stop there.
Well, that was actually our final question.
We're at 1 o'clock.
And we're right around 1 o'clock. So if either one of you have any final thoughts, but before they do that, I just want to remind everyone, because we get this question all the time, you will receive a recording of this webinar. Look in your email tomorrow around this time. Sometimes it takes us a little bit longer, but you will receive an email tomorrow with a recording to this webinar, and you will also in that email see When you click on that link, you will see all previous recordings as well, because we just get that question pretty frequently about that.
Do you want to talk for a second about questions for next week?
Next week, thank you for reminding me. Yes, next week we're going to do what we're planning on being probably our final webinar for this series that sort of organically happened over the last couple of weeks. We'll be doing our final webinar in this series. Jeff will be back to do really an open discussion and Q&A session. So we have done several topics, obviously, over the last couple of weeks. This is our 7th one. And you are free to email us your questions ahead of time, and those will probably be the questions we'll answer first. So if you have a burning question that you want to get in, please email us at info@diamond6leadership.com. That information will also be in tomorrow's email to remind you. But also if you have insights, comments, or we would love to also hear about, we have a little bit throughout the last few weeks heard about how other organizations are adapting to the situation. So we can learn as much, and other people can learn as much from you as you can learn from us. And so we're open to questions, but also if you have something that you think has gone really well in your organization through this adjustment period, other people can certainly learn from that as well. So please join us in emailing us your questions ahead of time. You can come live with your questions and any other topics you would like to discuss on the subject that we've been addressing, obviously, which is crisis management, leadership, change, communications, emotional intelligence, those topics. So that will be a week from today, also at noon Eastern. More information to come in your email.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ty. Joe, let me throw it to you for any final thoughts before I close up the session. Over to you.
My final thought is thank you for having me. This is my favorite topic. And don't forget, emotional intelligence is a skill that you can practice.
Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank my good friend Joe Doty for taking his time out of his busy schedule to join us for what I thought was just a really insightful presentation and discussion about this critical topic for leaders, emotional intelligence, particularly during a crisis. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us once again. And just reemphasize what Tanya said, and that is if you have any questions, I've already started gathering a bunch, please send them to us in advance, and we'll have that as our start point for our wrap-up discussion 1 week from today, Thursday of next week. So until then, everybody stay well, take care of yourselves, take care of your teammates, take care of your families. Talk to you then. Thanks again, Joe.